Hey guys, welcome back to the From Mourning to Meaning interview series, where we're learning how to break through the intolerable grief and return to meaningful living. I'm Laura Isabel, and today I have with me Theresa Gonzalez. Theresa, so nice to have you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Of course. Now, Theresa, I know you're not just the author of Silent Moms. I understand that you have had challenges in your life, and one of the biggest ones is basically living with a lie, um, being successful on the outside while keeping a painful secret on the inside. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
I came from an era, early 80s, where if you got pregnant, you were shipped to an aunt's or sent somewhere away from your family and friends. I grew up in a small community and it wasn't very acceptable, even in that time. And due to the societal pressures and the influences around me at the time, I felt though I had no other choice. So I ended up going to a home for unwed mothers. I placed my son for adoption and was told, as a lot of other birth moms, forget about it and move on, but you just don't.
Uh-uh.
And so I struggled for years in trying to find ways. No one taught us about grief or postpartum depression, the different things that you can face. And unfortunately, they were really bad coping mechanisms, from alcohol to drugs and eating disorder. And it wasn't until almost 20 years after my son's adoption that I was in a support group and had one of those moments realizing I have not grieved and I needed to start the process. And part of it was just even talking about my secret, which you're forced into that a lot of times and you don't share with others. So just even finding the tools and the confidence and getting to a place where I feel comfortable sharing with others and exposing our secrets. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I can only imagine if grieving is painful, holding it must be even more painful. And you did this for 20 years, you said, right?
Yes. When you're told that, they don't even really mention grief, I guess, in situations like that. So being young, I was 18, that, and you're still developing as a teenager. So your brain is not fully developed. And so the only way I knew to cope was sort of what I did when I was in high school. So I would turn to alcohol or all these other mechanisms to try and deal with it. But when things would bubble to the surface, you would just tend to push them down because it's like, that's what I was told, that's all I knew. And so those emotions and everything, from the grief and the loss and the sadness, everything just gets pushed down. And so when something would happen, it would trigger a person, an event, and an emotion would just bubble to the surface. And a lot of times it would erupt in just anger at someone, and unfortunately even total strangers, that I look back now and I'm like, oh, I am so sorry. But that's all you know. And for me, it was just even understanding where all this anger was coming from.
So you kind of felt like your personality was just changing. Like you weren't you really. You were angry, and it was coming out with people you didn't even know. It basically had to find its way out.
It did, because I think we try so much to put on a persona that everything is good and life is good, while behind the scenes, all these emotions and all, our situation, our loss, whatever we've gone through, we just keep pushing it down. But at some point, there's going to be a crack in our armory. There's going to be something that's going to cause that to come out. And for me, a lot of times it came out as anger. For someone else, it could be just a very emotional outburst. It could be something different. But the more that we push it down, I think the harder it is on us too, because for we're not addressing what we went through.
Yeah.
And we're not really being true to who we are because we keep pushing that down. So how can we truly be ourselves when we don't have that freedom in being ourselves by constantly pushing all that down and putting on a fake mask of who we think we should be?
Yeah, definitely. And how do you feel that um how do you feel is a way to process these emotions, to deal with these emotions? What do you think helped you when you finally realized that all these emotions were coming out, and um, you didn't understand why yet? Obviously, you were trying to figure that out. But what helped you during that process? What kind of tools did you use for that?
It took a while to actually figure out what I was feeling. When I started to process, I couldn't even define an emotion for you. Something would trigger and it would just create this big ball of tension. And, it could have been anger, it could have just been sadness. And I just wanted to stay away from people. I didn't understand it. So actually, it's in the book too, but it's a process that I really started using and didn't define until a few years later, but it's just called stop. I would just stop in the situation. It could have been someone who said something, someone who did something. It could have just been as subtle as a comment. And I could just feel, maybe your hands are fisting, your heart's starting to race, but you don't understand why. So I realized early on that I just had to leave the situation. So when you do that, you're able to take yourself out of that situation. You can take the time to process. So stop stands for basically stop in that situation. Don't make it worse. Don't add fuel to the fire, whatever's happening. Take yourself away from the situation. Take time to process what's happening. Own the emotion. Whatever you're feeling, define it. It's okay if it seems like the most obscure emotion, you don't understand why, but you feel it, it's okay. And then processing that. I initially couldn't even define an emotion. I had pushed stuff down for so long that if all I knew was anger, I had to stop my anger first.
Mhm.
I still remove myself from a situation a lot of times just to process who said what, why, what do I need to do? And then it's almost like a little Rolodex of emotions. Okay, what am I really feeling? Is it this? No. Is it this? Well, yeah, that's what it is. And then I could understand better. And then I could walk away from that situation going, okay, now I know I don't have to go back and take it out on someone. That if it happens again, that you don't have to go off and hide in a closet to deal with it. That when you process more and more like that, it might only be a matter of taking a few deep breaths and realizing that you've processed, this is what I'm feeling, and it's okay. One really aha moment that I had was, I'm trying to think, it was probably about 15 years after my son was adopted. And the family's all together, and life was good. I had a great job, all these sorts of things are happening, and we're at my parents' place, and my brother comes in with his beautiful baby girl, and everybody's excited and they're oogling over her, and I'm just like, this is, it's a little hard seeing a little baby, right? But when someone said, oh, it's your family's first grandchild, the emotion just struck me, and inside I'm going, no, she's not. I had the first one. And so your mind starts going like this. And I said, wait a minute, I got to take a breather. Went around the block. I came back 15 minutes later. I was calm. I was happy for them. My situation, my anger, what I was going through had nothing to do with them. And I didn't want to take it out on them either. You want to be able to celebrate in their joy and not take away from that. So that was a really good example for me and how that helped process. So long story short, but that's one of the things that really has helped.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great that you were able to do that because it's not easy. I mean, it's already hard enough noticing that you're going through these emotions, right? Because you really have to be aware of that. But then to actually stop them, it takes a lot. So you really have to work on that to really stop them and then analyze them and see where it's coming from. It's not an easy process, I imagine.
No, and I think it's something that the more accustomed we get to processing in a manner like that, that whenever you're going throughout your day, a, you know, what's a good example? Another driver cuts you off in traffic. You know, a coworker says something or does something, and or just even a spouse or your children or someone says something that triggers something in you. It just helps you take that deep breath. You know, is it their crisis or is it mine? How do you separate that, and how can you calm yourself so that doesn't build up further anxiety or anger in you? So it is a process, but I think when we give ourselves that freedom and the willingness to work through those emotions, and I know a lot of people don't like talking about emotions, but they're part of life. They're not good, they're not bad, they just are. So I think we just need to learn how to deal with life and how they kind of come into our life and how we let go of them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And would you say that what started you to really start analyzing what you were feeling and how you're feeling, was it that what you mentioned, the group, going into that support group?
I actually started with an addictions recovery group.
Mm.
I thought that, I guess because I didn't really fully understand, but I knew that I had a problem. So
Mhm.
I thought if drinking was the issue, or whatever the addiction was or the struggle was, that's where I started. And it was really informative, and I think the information was really good. But I started to realize as well that that wasn't the answer. We use the analogy of an onion so much, but it still really does pertain to situations like this, because going to a group like that, you peel the layers, but the core issue of all what I had been carrying for so many years was my pregnancy and the adoption and everything that transpired after that. And I did have one experience, and again, it's one of these ones that just erupts. And I was working for a nonprofit at the time, and to be a peer counselor, you also have to attend their support groups, just to make sure, which I fully understand, that when you're in a counseling session, it's not about you, that you're
Mhm.
there to help the client. So whether you had a miscarriage, an abortion, adoption, anything to do with pregnancy, that you attended their groups. And first meeting, I'm sitting there and everybody's sharing, and it was really nice to have the safety and comfort of other birth mothers to share. But at the very end, the facilitator said, "All right, everybody, bring out your pictures." And I'm like, "What?" I had none. My adoption was closed, and I had clenched the side of my chair so hard I left nail marks in my hand. That was the next step for me, is realizing that yes, life is good, but no, you have not dealt with a lot of the issues from
Yeah.
your past. Yes. So someone else might have those kind of moments, but that's good. It may hit you in the face, it may hurt, but those are the moments that I think we need to pay attention to, because that's your memory, that's your past, that's your life saying you need to deal with this.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually love that you're bringing all this up because I feel like sometimes that's something we don't think about. We think the loss of a loved one, and we don't directly think of adoption. And this is definitely like one. This is definitely a loss, and there's definitely the grief that comes with it. It's not something so simple. It's not just a transition of life that you just have a put up a child for adoption. It's not that simple. And when you go through it, you definitely feel all these emotions, but out from outside you don't stop to think about everything that person might be going through, especially like you mentioned, yours was silent. No one knew about it. So these are all the things you were holding. So it's so nice that you're able to actually open up and share this, because I'm sure there's other people out there that maybe it wasn't in the same times as you that you had to keep it a secret, but maybe they feel they still have to, or they don't bring it up as much as they want to
Mhm.
because of that, because they don't know how to bring it up, or what people might say, or what people might think. And the truth is that it's something they're holding on to, and it is something that's bringing grief. It is something, it's a loss. It really is a loss.
It is. And if someone who's had, and again, it's not necessarily adoption, like from the past, it could be a secret they've been hanging on to forever.
It's true.
But again, that's still a burden, something that they've been carrying for so many years. And
Mhm.
there's different ways to, you don't have to tell a stranger, but when you get connected with someone that you trust, that there are ways of sharing a secret. And whether it's writing it down, whether it's writing in a letter, not necessarily sharing it, but preparing that when you share with someone, you can not expose, but reveal a past where you're hurting and this person can help you through it. And that was the most difficult part for me. Was I had a younger brother, and my grandmother actually went to her grave without me even knowing about my pregnancy. And my younger brother was only 8 years old, and so as a family, we didn't tell him. But as he got older and older, I kept putting it off and putting it off. So I think the biggest thing when we have secrets is don't leave it unfinished for too long. I waited for too long, and I had a great relationship with my brother. But every time I saw him, the little voice was saying, "You got to tell him." And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going to lose his respect. I'm going to lose this. But at one time, my two brothers were having lunch together. And the older one said, after a woman had walked by who was pregnant, she goes, "Oh, I wonder if Theresa will ever have contact with her son." And the other brother goes, "What?" Just confusion. He had no idea. So that hurt that he found out that way. It wasn't my brother's responsibility, my parents, it was mine. It was still a secret that I carried for a long time, but it was still my responsibility to tell him. And so instantly I called him that night and I apologized. And that was always one of my biggest regrets, is that I waited too long to tell him. So I don't know, who's listening or watching and what their situation or what the past might be. But my hope is that they can find a way, whether it's working through a coach, a counselor, someone that they trust, to be able to let go of that burden and have that freedom to, not carry it anymore, right?
Yeah, definitely. And do you feel, going through this, do you feel like that first moment when you talk about it, there's already an instant sort of relief? And maybe not all the way, but something there? Or is it something that takes a little bit longer than just saying it that first time to actually feel the difference?
I think the first time there's more a fear of being judged. We we carry these preconceived ideas of how we think people are going to respond, and that's what keeps us from telling. But when you do share, and it doesn't have to be the whole story, it could just be little snippets from your past, that it's like, okay, I trust this person, that you share more and more. And there's such a sense of relief that just even being a room with others that understand and being able to share and let some of that go.
Okay.
I found that the more that I shared my story, the easier it became and the less fear I had. And I thought, if someone's judging me, then they really don't know me. They don't know my story. Maybe they don't understand adoption. Maybe they don't understand just even grief in general, and they don't know how to respond when someone shares a loss. And so it's just gauging each situation or each time that you share with someone. But it became easier for me. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And as the time passed, I mean, everyone's different, so this is not something that will be the same for everyone, obviously. But you personally, did you feel it was easier to remember that son you adopted, or to kind of, once you said it, yeah, you said it, but not think more of it, like not think further of it? And the reason I ask is more than anything, for example, because when you go through pregnancy, you already identify yourself as a mother, right? So when you put them up to adoption, that's probably something that you battle with. Am I a mother? Am I not? What's going on? So I imagine that's something that you carry with you still. It's still something that that's still something that you define yourself as, because that's what you are. So in that sense, do you kind of show a memory towards it, have some sort of way to celebrate that life that you gave, or is it easier for you to say, I know it, and I don't mind sharing it, but I don't really put much more thought further than that?
It might vary from person to person, but I know for myself that, especially as a birth mom, I've learned a lot that birth moms from open adoption experience a lot of the same emotions. In some ways, it might even be harder because they do have contact. They get photos and letters, and they have open communication and get to see their child, but then they have to walk away. And so they're constantly, that give and take, and I can't imagine the loss that they feel each time that they walk away from their child who's going back to their adoptive family. With me, I always considered myself a mom, even though society, certain people may not recognize me as that. And I know it may still be out there, but I guess any woman you talk to who has been pregnant, who maybe has miscarried or lost a child before or after birth, there's just something about being pregnant that creates this nurturing in you that even after placing my son, it was always there. Especially on days like Mother's Day, my son's birthday, those are those reminders.
Yeah.
And it was after over 20 years after I met my husband that I realized I would not have any other children. But you're still dealing with the loss of other things. Like I lost my son, but I'm not going to hear mother anymore or hear the name. Mm-hmm. So I started doing things for myself. I would just go shopping around Mother's Day, and I would find something that was significant to me at that time in my life. And for a period of about 5 years, I would just buy pictures that just really seemed to resonate with me. For the first few years after my son's adoption, I would just go light a candle in a church for him and say a prayer. I would even, when my son turned 18, I started buying birthday presents for him, never knowing if he would ever get them, if I would ever meet him. But there's always, for a birth mother from closed adoption, there's just always questions, so many questions.
Yeah.
What does he look like? Where does he live? How is he doing in school? Does he have a girlfriend? All these things throughout the different phases of his life. There's always the questions. And for some, those questions do get answered, and it brings, those questions get answered for them. Others may never know. And that's the hard part, I think, for a lot, because when we grieve, we assume that we go through these different phases and then we're okay. We won't grieve again. But I think any loss that we've had in our lives, for me, it was my son, my mom 3 years ago, and just my dad recently, that those memories and that loss will carry with us. So it's not like we're moving through our grief and we're going to ignore it. It will come up and it'll resurface after different events, or certain things will trigger it, memories, certain days, even smells can trigger an emotion.
Yeah.
And learning to acknowledge our grief, to acknowledge and celebrate the person through the rest of our lives. I'll never be able to eliminate everything that happened, right? I'll carry that with me. And so I take both a blessing from that, and just even the memories that were harder, they're still there, but they're not as painful. So
Yeah.
you move forward with our grief with hope.
Yeah, definitely. And when you keep those little reminders, what you bought, you said you bought him birthday gifts starting at 18 and all that. Not only are they reminders, but do they also bring you a bit of joy, like thinking, oh, he's turning a year older today? So even though you're not giving him the gift, it's kind of like you are to you. You are. It's your little way of remembering and celebrating it with him.
Absolutely. I have an old shoebox I've had since I was at the 𝗵𝗵𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗍𝗵𝗏𝗏, and it has memories in there. It's when I was on my own, my mom would send me something every week, little knickknacks or letters and pictures. And so that's my box of keepsake. And that's where I keep, the presents that were for my son, and little things throughout the year, books, cassette tape that a guy wrote. It was a song he wrote for his birth mom because he was adopted. And it's a way, I think, anytime that we lose someone, especially a child, I can't imagine, a woman who's maybe had a baby shower and they lose their child, and they have all these things and these memories, and the attachment to them is so hard. And there's nothing wrong if you want to keep them. And because every time I would open the box, initially there's just emotions, because there's such a connection to everything that's within that box.
Of course.
But over the years, as you go through your journey, and now when I open it, I look at it and I'm just like, wow, the memories are there. Some of them are getting a little bit more faded, but how far I've come in the journey, and how proud, not in a selfish way, but just to gone through what I've gone through, and come out the other side because of everything in that little box. So it does give people hope that the more that they move on, and every time they open up their keepsake box, that it hurts less and less, but they still have the memories.
Definitely. That's awesome. That's beautiful. So I know that you want to share something with those that are watching. I don't know if you want to mention it right now, maybe.
Well, we did discuss a few things. My journey is kind of broken into 3 phases: history, healing, and hope. So the history is where we grew up, the secret that we're carrying, our past, what family environment we grew up in that may have influenced our choices or the situation that happened to us. And that's all part of acknowledging our past, the history, the situation. It's going back to like the 𝗹𝗵𝗹𝗏, who, what, when, where, and why. Who was there? What happened? A lot of times we can't acknowledge and accept until we look at our history and define exactly what happened to us and what we need to heal. So that's sort of the history part of it. The healing is what I've talked about already, is just understanding our emotions, being able to define them. What do we do with them when we know what we're feeling? It could be just sadness. How do we deal with sadness? Do we rent a sad movie and cry? It's learning what to do with those emotions when they happen. And it could be sadness, depression, anger, anxiety, I used to get anxiety going to baby showers. I love supporting friends and their babies, and it was exciting. But I also set boundaries for myself because I knew how it affected me.
Yeah.
And I would go in maybe a little bit later, bring the present, play some games, and then I might bow out a little bit earlier. But if someone knows that it's too stressful, that's why you put boundaries, is you know what your issues are and how you can protect yourself.
Mhm.
So all those sorts of things, even guilt for things that we did. And because I look back and I was young, I was a teenager, and all the things you get involved in, that you feel such guilt and shame for a lot of your behaviors and your actions. But I was only doing what I knew at the time. So I can't continue to carry this guilt and shame for everything that I did because I didn't know any different. So working through those emotions, and part of that, even anger, and understanding exactly who we're angry at. I had to draw an anger circle and I had to split it up. And as I started my healing journey, I realized that the anger circle that I first drew, and there was a little pie shape for me, it actually got bigger and bigger. But that was because of some of the guilt and the shame that I felt for the things that I had done. When we're able to work through those emotions, then we can take the next step, which to me is the hope part. When we can define all that and we acknowledge it and we accept it, then we look at forgiveness. Not everybody is open. When you come to a place of forgiveness, especially forgiveness of self and the things that we do or say, there is freedom in it. Not everybody, when you offer an olive branch to someone to maybe mend a relationship, they may not be as accepting. But that's okay. Part of forgiveness is us being able to let go what someone else did or said to us. I had an aunt, a beautiful woman, who was a nun, and she actually worked with troubled teens. So when I ended up in the situation that I did, I just assumed that I would have the same support, but I didn't. So some of the things that were said and done were really hurtful to me. But years later, more maturity, maybe just better understanding, I put myself in her shoes, and it helped me understand why she did what she did. I can't take back what was said,
Yeah.
but it helped me understand better. And when she got sick and she eventually passed, I had compassion for her. She was family to me. So that hope is learning about forgiveness and letting go. And yeah, and finding ways to, I think, connect as well. A lot of my journey, I don't think would have ever happened if I hadn't connected with other birth mothers, if I hadn't found other counselors or coaches, if I hadn't understood how important my healing, not just like my emotional healing, but when you go through grief, everybody knows it's like a roller coaster. Some days are good days, other days are really bad days, and they're hard. So it's, what do we do with those tough days? We really need self-care. And I used to go for massages. I'd go see a chiropractor. I would maybe just stay in my pajamas all day on a Sunday. However that looks, it's making sure that when we go through grief, that our physical health, we try and maintain it the best we can in order for us to kind of keep taking those little steps forward.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So let's share again what we're gonna be offering them.
I will have just an overview a little bit of the 3 sections of the history, what that entails, healing the different emotions, working with that, including the stop analogy and healing, and a few things in there, a few steps that they can take, and some suggestions on ways that they connect with others to help them, connect with all these other people and organizations to move them through, right? Because I had a birth mom support group, but for the loss that someone in particular is going through, they might want to go to a grief counselor or a grief support group. So whatever their particular situation is to seek out these resources to help them through that. And however that looks, is connecting just with your story. My mom always said that everybody could write a book, because our lives can just be so interesting and fascinating and just all over the map sometimes. By writing or documenting, journaling, they say, is such a benefit as well. And using that tool to get your journey out and just everything that you're going through. Some may not like to journal, but there might be other ways that someone decides to share. But yeah, I'll do the document, and then there'll also be a link to my book as well for a discount code. So
perfect. So I'm definitely going to give you guys that link. So she went a little bit into what each section means, but she is going to provide you that information sheet, which is going to give you a little bit more detail. And like she said, some exercises and stuff like that. So that might be very useful for you guys. So I'll go ahead, share that link with you guys. If you haven't already seen it, go back to that email and see if you see it right there. That way you can easily access it. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for offering that, Theresa. And thank you so much for sharing your story. So for being so open and vulnerable in that sense. I'm sure there's going to be people out there that can relate. And just like you, they're hiding it and they don't know what to do about it. And it's probably weighing them down. So hearing your story will definitely help them release that and start working through their grief and start working through their pain. So I really appreciate you joining us and sharing that with us.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I think, especially nowadays with the COVID and everybody locked down, that when someone goes through grief and they can't share with others and they can't even, visit someone, or there's physical distancing, that whole grief process right now, I think, has really been hard on some people.
Yeah.
And your whole message from mourning to meaning, I can't imagine someone who's lost and a family member or a death in a family and not being able to grieve publicly and share their loss with others. So I just really encourage someone who's facing a really difficult time right now, that finding ways to take that mourning. For me, my grief and my meaning turned into helping others through my story. And I just hope that anybody who's watching today can reach out, whether it's a friend, whether it's through a counselor, through Zoom, however that looks, find ways that will help them grieve their loss, even in the midst of this time.
Definitely. Definitely. We all hope that, right? Coming here together, that's our hope, that they do find any help they need, any tip they need, anything that will get them started towards healing, right? So definitely. And thank you again for joining us, for sharing all that with us. And thank you guys for trusting us and coming in to watch another interview in the From Mourning to Meaning series. Like we said, we really hope you're taking something from it, and we look forward to continuing to provide you more information, more tips, more advice, and anything else that can help you. Thanks, guys. See you for the next one.
Thanks.
Bye.